Well now, are you settled? If so, let's do our little trick. Let those eyes soften. Don't shut them, just rest them, let them blur. As the room grows quieter around you, and you'll find that the longer you try to stay awake, the sooner sleep will find you. Let your jaw relax without effort. Let your breathing slow until it feels almost automatic. Let the bed take your weight completely. And if you hear something stop moving nearby, stay as you are. It's only waiting to see if you'll react. Now, let's begin tonight's stories. The queue moved the way queues always moved in small Irish towns. A shuffle, a pause, a cough into a sleeve, a glance at the clock, another shuffle. A man stood near the back with his cap pulled low. The brim cut his face into shadow. You could have walked past him twice and still missed him. One customer stood ahead of him, an older woman with a shopping bag that looked too heavy for her arm. She counted coins into her palm, took them back, counted again, and worried them like rosary beads. The man watched the counter. He watched the bank clerk. He watched the way she kept her hair pinned tight at the back of her head, tidy for work, and the way her hands moved fast when she wrote in the ledger. A young woman, 20s, a calm face, the kind you trusted with your wages. Her nameplate sat at the edge of the counter, half hidden by papers. The man didn't lean in to read it. He didn't have to. The older woman finished. The clerk took her time as if careful movements could keep the day polite. The older woman gathered her bag and left with her shoulders set. The man stepped forward. The clerk looked up and offered the sort of smile that came from habit more than warmth. "How can I help you?" The man's voice came out easy, nothing harsh in it, nothing that caught the ear. "What time have you got there?" The clerk blinked, glanced at the wall clock above the counter, and answered the way a person answered the time, thinking it was a strange question and nothing more. "It's 1 o'clock, lunchtime." The man gave a small nod, like that settles something for him. "Exactly," he said. He reached into his coat. The clerk's eyes followed his hand. He brought out no weapon. He brought out no note. He brought out a satchel, plain, worn, the kind of thing a laborer might carry bread in. He laid it on the counter, close to her side, close enough that her fingers could touch it without reaching. He leaned in slightly, close enough that she heard him and no one else did. His words landed soft. His meaning didn't. "I have a man standing outside St. Pat's Primary School as we speak," he said. "He's watching your 8-year-old daughter, Clodagh, playing in the yard. And, dare I say, he's a very violent man." The clerk stiffened in a way only a mother could. It wasn't even a full movement. It was a small shift in her eyes, a flick of attention that left the counter and went somewhere else entirely. "She has a blue tartan skirt," the man went on, "with a ponytail tied in a green ribbon." The clerk's mouth opened and no sound came out. The man kept his voice low, steady, almost helpful. "If I'm not back to him in 10 minutes, you'll find her at the bottom of the lake come morning." A moment hung there between them, thin as paper. The clerk looked at the satchel. She looked at the man's face. She tried to find a crack in the story, a joke, a bluff, a mistake, something. She found nothing. The man nudged the satchel a fraction closer. "Stay calm," he said. "Fill it." The clerk's fingers went to the satchel like they belonged to someone else. The room around her carried on, a cough, a footstep, the door opening and closing, a voice behind the queue asking if they were serving yet. The clerk didn't lift her head again. She reached down, opened the satchel and began to fill it. Notes first, the thick, easy ones. She slid them in with care as if neatness mattered. Her hands kept a rhythm because rhythm was all she had. She kept her breathing smooth because if she broke, she would scream, and if she screamed, Clodagh would drown. The man watched her without hurry. He didn't grin. He didn't threaten again. He only stood there, cap low, eyes steady, a shadow with a quiet plan. When the satchel sagged with weight, the clerk stopped. Her fingers trembled once, and she pressed them to the counter, willing them to behave. The man picked up the satchel. He gave her a look that said, "You did well." He turned and walked out, as calm as if he'd asked about interest rates. No one stopped him. No one looked twice. A decent coat and a steady step did a lot in the 1930s. Men with decent coats were assumed to have decent reasons. He rounded the corner into a side street where the shop fronts leaned in close and the air smelled of damp stone and coal smoke. A car waited there, engine idling low. It wasn't a new car. It was the sort that still carried the lines of the old world. Boxy, heavy, a dark color that hid dirt. The driver sat behind the wheel with his cap on and jaw set. The man opened the passenger door and climbed in. The satchel landed in his lap with a quiet thud. The driver glanced once at it, once at the man. "Well, did she fall for it?" the driver asked. The man looked ahead at the street as if watching for someone who might have followed. "They always do," he said. The driver's mouth twitched. Not a smile, relief. He pressed the pedal and the car rolled forward, unhurried, into the town traffic. They didn't speed. Speed looked guilty. They moved with the day. They passed carts and bicycles. They passed men carrying sacks and women carrying baskets. They passed a priest walking with his hands behind his back, head down, as if counting sins in his mind. The man with the satchel kept his cap low and his face still. If you had looked through the window, you would have seen two ordinary men going somewhere ordinary. Time did what it did. The day slid on, light dulled, and shadows grew longer. Mist began to form in low places as evening settled, drifting in slow sheets over fields that had gone quiet. By the time they had left the last cluster of houses behind, the world had changed into that softer, darker version of itself, where sound traveled oddly and distance looked wrong. They headed for the long stretch of road people spoke about in half-jokes and quiet warnings, the Barrow Line. It ran through open country and low ground. It cut past water that didn't belong to any lake you'd name on a map. It moved through marshland that held its own weather, its own moods. The driver's hand stayed tight on the wheel. The man with the satchel leaned back and let the car's vibrations come through the seat into his bones. A while passed. The road straightened. The mist thickened in dips. The driver cleared his throat. He did it twice. The man turned his head slightly. "What's up?" he asked. The driver kept his eyes on the road. "It's this road," he said. "I've heard things." The man made a sound through his nose, dismissive, amused. "Old wives' tales." The driver didn't answer straight away. The man looked out at the hedgerows and the grey, the world turning into one long tunnel. "We get into the next county," the man said. "We get whiskey and a hot meal as free men with a few extra bob in our pockets. Now drive." The driver swallowed. He drove. The tires hissed on damp ground. The engine hummed. Mist slid past like smoke, curling around the car's lights, turning them into pale cones. A few moments went by. The driver's shoulders rose and fell with every breath. He tried to make it subtle. It wasn't. The man kept his face calm. He loosened his grip on the satchel and shifted it to the floor by his feet. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror once more. Twice. "Keep your mind on the road," the man said. The driver gave a short nod. The car rolled on, and then something moved beside them. Not beside, exactly, more like a shadow cutting along the edge of their headlight. It passed them. It overtook them. Fast. So fast, the mind refused to accept it, like a bird crossing your vision in the dark. The driver jerked his head. The man leaned forward slightly. What was that?" the driver asked, voice too sharp. The man stared ahead. "There was nothing," he said. The driver looked again into the mirror. He saw mist, lights, his own face reflected faint in the glass. He exhaled through his nose. The car moved on. The man said nothing for a stretch. He listened to the engine. He listened to the road. He listened for the second time your body always expects after the first time it sees something it cannot explain. It came. The driver's window was open a crack, as if he needed air to keep his head clear. A hand didn't reach in. A rope didn't hook him. There was no voice. The driver went up, straight up, as if the night itself had grabbed him by the collar and lifted. No scream, no struggle. One moment his hands were on the wheel, and the next his seat was empty, the cap still on the crown of his head as he vanished into the darkness above the window line. The wheels spun and the car swerved. The man grabbed for the dashboard with one hand and the seat with the other. The car lurched off the road. Tires skidded. Metal groaned. The front end hit a tree at the roadside with a hard, ugly sound. The engine coughed once. It died. Silence fell hard. The man sat there for a second, chest rising, eyes wide under the cap brim. His ears rang. His breath came in sharp pulls. He looked at the driver's seat, empty. He looked up through the windshield, mist and dark. He pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinge. He stepped out onto the wet ground and mud. His shoes sank slightly. He smelled marsh water and crushed grass. He looked down the road. Moonlight had found a hole in the cloud and laid a pale strip across the mist, and in that strip, ahead, was a figure, a rider, a wide-brimmed hat, a cloak hanging heavy from his shoulders, a shape that sat too still to be alive. He sat on a huge black horse. The horse reared onto its hind legs, front hooves cutting at the air, head high, mane snapping like a black flag. The rider's eyes glowed green, not bright like lamps, green like a fox's eyes caught in torchlight. The man stared, mind scrambling for sense. He didn't get it. He got the fear instead. He snapped back to himself, looked to the car, looked to the satchel. He reached in, grabbed it, and pulled it close to his chest. He ran, not toward the road, toward the marshland, toward the open wet ground where reeds rose and water hid. His boots splashed into shallow pools, mud grabbed at his soles, mist gathered around his knees, climbed to his waist, climbed to his chest. He heard hooves not far behind. He forced his legs to move faster. His breath burned. His coat flapped. Mist closed in. It moved like it had a mind, thickening in front of him, thinning behind him, guiding him away from the firm ground and deeper into the wet. He slowed, caught his balance, and pushed on. The sound of hooves came nearer, steady, sure, as if the rider knew the ground better than any man could. A shape appeared in the mist to his left, a pale oval, a face. It wasn't a full face, it was more like a suggestion of one, like you might see a face in a cloud if you stared too long. The man tried to look away. Another face appeared to his right. This one had its mouth open, stretched as if pressed from the inside against glass. He stumbled. His foot went into a deeper pocket of water, and cold shot up his leg. He hissed through his teeth and yanked his foot free and ran again, and the mist thickened ahead. He changed direction. Mist thickened there too. He swung right. Mist slid in, blocking. His chest hammered. He turned in a tight circle, trying to find a gap. The marsh around him looked the same in every direction, grey and pale and wet, with reeds like ribs sticking up from the ground. The hooves stopped. Silence again. The man stood still, panting, satchel clutched to his chest like a child. He listened. He heard nothing for a beat, and then a snort came close behind him. He spun. The rider sat there in the mist, close enough to touch. The huge black horse stood calm, steam rolling from its mouth into the air. The rider's face stayed in shadow under the hat, only the green eyes held. A blunderbuss rested in one hand, old and thick, the kind of gun you'd see in a museum case, too heavy for modern men to carry with ease. This rider held it like it was nothing. The man backed away slowly, boots sucking in mud. His eyes darted for an opening. Mist shifted again. Faces moved with it, turning toward him, watching. He tried to speak. Only air came out. The rider raised the blunderbuss. Slowly, no hurry, no anger. The man's thoughts snapped into a single line. Run. He tried. His legs moved a step. Mist pressed in. A face peered right in front of him, pale and close, eyes closed, lips parted, like someone sleeping underwater. He jerked away, and the rider aimed. The man lifted the satchel without thinking, as if money could block death. A green flash lit the mist. It hit the man's satchel-wielding arm, not like a bullet, like a burst of cold, like the touch of deep ground. His arm changed in an instant. Skin drew tight and dry, the color drained, fingers curled stiffly as if the joints had forgotten how to work. It looked like an arm that had been in the ground too long. The man screamed. The sound came out ragged and ruined. He clutched his arm to his chest. Pain spiked through him, hot and sharp, and under it was something else, a numbness that belonged to death. He turned and ran again, half stumbling, dragging the deadened arm. Hooves followed, close. He splashed through the water and reeds, breath tearing out of him, the mist twisting around him, guiding, hemming him in. Faces slid in and out, quick glimpses, a cheek, a brow, a mouth pulled into a silent cry. He swung left, mist blocked. He swung right, mist blocked. He tried to go forward. A wall of pale grey rose up, thick as a blanket, and he slammed into it like it was solid. He bounced back, shocked, and stared. It was mist. It should have moved. It held. He staggered away from it, eyes wide, hair damp, sweat cold on his skin. The ground under him changed. Less reed, more black water. The marsh opened into a wide, shallow stretch that reflected the moon like dull glass. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to duck behind, just him, the wet ground, and pale air. The rider approached at a walk. The huge horse stepped through water without a splash, without sound that fit. The man backed away, boots sliding, breath heaving. The rider stopped a few feet away, blunderbuss lowered. The horse's head dipped slightly as if smelling the man's fear. The rider sat still for a beat, green eyes locked on the man. The man tried to speak. His voice came out in broken pieces. Please, please don't hurt me, he managed. It sounded pathetic, even to him. The rider moved at last. He dismounted, slow. Boots touched the wet ground and didn't sink. The cloak hung around him like night. He stepped forward. The man backed away again, his heel caught in mud. He went down on one knee, and pain shot up his leg. He tried to push himself up. The rider closed the distance. A gloved hand reached out and grabbed the man by the throat. The grip was firm, effortless. The man's feet left the ground. He hung there, dangling, toes kicking above the water. His good hand clawed at the wrist. His deadened arm swung uselessly at his side. He couldn't break the grip. He couldn't even shift it. He looked down into the rider's face. Shadow, hat brim, green eyes, nothing else. The rider cocked his head slightly, like a bird considering something small. The man's eyes bulged. Tears ran down his cheeks. His hair, dark a moment ago, began to drain of color, not in a slow way, in a fast, awful way, as if fear itself was bleaching it. Strands went pale, more strands followed. The rider held him there until the man's kicking slowed, until the man's hands fell away, until the man's mouth opened and no sound came out, and the rider released him. He collapsed, sprawled into the wet, coughing, gasping, dragging air like it was the first time he had ever used lungs. He tried to crawl away, his dead arm dragged. He made it a foot, then two. The rider stepped back towards the horse. The horse waited. The rider mounted again with one smooth motion. He turned the horse slightly as if finishing a job. The green eyes held on the man one last time. The mist faces around them shifted, watching, pressing close, as if eager to swallow what was left. The rider and the horse moved into the grey and became part of it. The man lay in mud, hair white, arm ruined, eyes staring at nothing. He didn't rise. He didn't crawl again. He stayed where he fell. A week later, a couple took a walk out along the edges of that country, looking for quiet and a bit of romance away from town talk. They followed a dry line of ground where the marsh gave way to firmer earth. They laughed at first, hands brushing, shoulders leaning close. And they stopped laughing when they smelled it. They saw him half sunk near the reeds, body slack, skin drawn tight in a way that made him look older than he could have been. His satchel lay nearby, split open, money soaked through with marsh water. His arm looked like it belonged to a man already laid out in a coffin. His face looked worse than that. His eyes were open. His hair was white. The couple ran, stumbling, calling out for help, voices carrying thin across the open wet ground. Men came later. Guards came later. Someone said it was drink. Someone said it was a gang. Someone said it was punishment from other thieves. People explained it the way people always did, trying to make it fit inside the world they understood. It never fit. And in towns and cottages near that long stretch of road, the old stories didn't fade. They grew. They spoke of a highwayman who rode where mist gathered thickest. They called him Jack of the Road, a robber who took no gold, a rider who went after something else, the very essence of a man, the life inside him. And if you stood on the Barrow Line on certain nights when the marsh air turned pale and close, you could see faces in the mist. Not one, not two, more than that if you looked long enough, pressed there like memories caught in cloth. And after that night, people swore the mist had two new faces, one with hair gone white, one with a mouth still shaped around a scream that never made it out. And the Barrow Line kept its name, because roads like that keep what they take. Molly learned how to make herself small. It started on the road long before she ever knew Dickie Harrigan's name, when shrinking into hedges and doorways meant the difference between being noticed and being left alone. Hunger taught her to walk lightly. Cold taught her to fold her arms tight and keep going. By the time she reached the edge of the bog road where Harrigan's house crouched against the wind, she was all bone and stubbornness, her boots split at the seams, her coat too thin for the season that was turning. She was sitting on the low wall outside his place when he found her. He stopped, looked her up and down, and said nothing for a long moment. His face was long and sharp, with a mouth that pulled sideways when he thought. He carried a sack over one shoulder, turf dust on his trousers, a cane in his hand that he leaned on more than he needed to. "You'll freeze there," he said at last. "If you're going to starve, you might as well do it inside." She followed him because she had no reason not to. Inside, the house smelled of damp and smoke, and there was bread on the table, there was a pot on the fire. He put food in front of her and watched her eat, slow and careful, like an animal that had learned pain from reaching too fast. "You work," he said. "You eat, you stay, and that's the way of it." Molly nodded. She would have agreed to anything that night. The first cruelty came quiet. The floor needed scrubbing, he said, and he handed her a bucket. She worked until her hands stung, until the water went grey and gritty. When she finished, he pointed at the bucket. "Drink it," he said. She thought she'd misheard. She looked at his face and saw no joke there. Her throat went dry. He waited, cane resting against his leg, the end tapping once on the floor. She drank. It tasted of old dirt and soap and something sickly she could not name. He watched until she gagged, until tears ran down her face, and only then did he turn away. "Waste nothing," he said. "You'll learn." After that, the cane became part of the house. It whipped her back when she worked too slow, when she spoke out of turn, when she dared to look at him with something like defiance in her eyes. He did it methodically, as if it were a chore. Afterwards, he'd sit by the fire and breathe hard, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly, and she'd lie awake on the floorboards, counting the cracks in the ceiling, waiting for the pain to dull. Every evening, without fail, Dickie Harrigan went out to the shed. The shed stood a little apart from the house, low and squat, its door hanging crooked on one hinge. The ground around it was churned and bare, as if nothing could grow there for long. Molly learned quickly not to ask about it. "You stay away from that place," he told her once, his voice sharp. "You've no business going in there." After that, she watched him from the corner of her eye. He'd take the lantern and the cane and step out into the dark. Sometimes he was gone an hour, sometimes longer. And when he came back, something had changed in him. He looked hollowed out, his eyes too bright, in his skull, sweat on his brow, even on cold nights. Once she heard him muttering to himself as he crossed the yard, words she couldn't catch, a pleading tone that didn't fit the man she knew. and yet the next night he went again. Winter crept closer, the days shortened, Molly's back healed and split and healed again. He found new ways to hurt her that didn't leave marks straight away. He made her stand outside barefoot until her feet went numb. He took her food away for a day at a time, then set a plate just out of reach and watched her hands tremble. Still, he went to that shed. The first snow came early. It fell thin and dry, whitening the bog and the road, softening the world. Molly watched it from the window and felt something like hope stir in her chest, small and foolish. That night, Dickie Harrigan went out as usual. She heard him stumble near the shed. There was a sound like a breath forced out of a chest, sharp and sudden, and then nothing at all. Molly waited. Minutes passed. The fire burned low. No footsteps came back. She wrapped her coat around herself and went to the door. Snow dusted the yard, untouched except for the set of tracks leading away from the house. They stopped near the shed. She found him lying in the snow, face turned to the side, eyes open and staring. The lantern lay smashed beside him. The cane was a few feet away, half buried. She stood there a long time before she understood that he was dead. Something loosened in her chest then, a knot she didn't know was there. She laughed, a short sound that surprised her. She laughed again, louder, until tears froze on her cheeks. She dragged him closer to the house and covered him with an old blanket. She didn't touch the cane. She went inside and slept for the first time in months without listening for his footsteps. No one came the next day. The road stayed quiet. Snow fell again, thicker this time, burying the tracks. Molly waited, watching for neighbors who never appeared. Harrigan had kept his distance from others, you see. She had never seen a friendly face at the door. By the third day, her back began to ache. At first, she thought it was a memory. Her body remembered pain even when there was no hand to give it. She tried to ignore it, busying herself with small tasks, eating what little food remained. That night, the ache sharpened. It burned, deep and raw. She woke with a gasp and lay still, listening. The house was quiet. Then she saw the snow outside the window, fresh tracks across the yard. They came from the direction of the shed. Molly's chest thumped. She pulled on her coat and stepped outside. The tracks were clear, pressed deep into the snow, heavier than her own. They led to the door of the house and stopped. Her back throbbed. She went inside and stripped off her coat and shirt, shaking. She turned toward the cracked mirror by the fireplace and lifted the lamp. Across her back, bright and wet and new, were marks of the cane. She stared at them until the room blurred. Her breath came fast. She pressed her fingers to one welt and flinched. In the days that followed, the tracks returned, always from the shed, always ending at the door. Sometimes she found the marks in the morning. Sometimes they bloomed while she watched, skin splitting as if struck by an unseen hand. She never saw him. She heard things, though. A scrape near the shed at dusk, the faint sound of breath behind her when she bent over the table. Once, a pressure on the mattress, as if someone had sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb her too much. She didn't go near the shed. Snow piled up against its walls, but the ground around it stayed dark and bare. Whatever business Dickie Harrigan had kept there did not end with his death. Molly learned to live small again. She moved through the house quietly. She ate little. She slept in fits. When the pain came, she endured it, teeth clenched, refusing to scream. One night she found the cane propped against the wall beside the door. It was clean. She picked it up with trembling hands and carried it outside. She flung it into the bog as hard as she could. It vanished into the dark water with a soft splash. Next morning, there it was, back where it belonged, leaning where it always had been. She stopped trying to rid herself of it after that. The tracks grew deeper as the winter wore on. Sometimes they circled the house. Sometimes they lingered at the window, pressed close enough that she could see where a foot had rested, toe angled toward the glass. Her back healed and split and healed again. She lost count of the days. Once, in desperation, she crept to the edge of the yard and looked toward the shed. Its door hung open, a crack, black inside. The air around it felt wrong, heavy and thick, as if sound did not move properly there. She turned away. By spring, she no longer wondered why Dickie Harrigan had gone back to that place every night. She understood that whatever waited there had not finished with him. Death had only loosened its hold enough to let it roam. It kept its bargain. Molly didn't know when the last mark appeared. Pain blurred into one long thread. She lay on the floor by the fire, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind move over the bog. Outside, snow melted, grass showed through. The tracks faded, but the sense of being watched did not. When the neighbors finally came, months later, they found the house quiet. They found the shed standing open, its ground bare and black. And inside the house, they found a girl lying by the hearth, breathing shallow and slow, her back a map of wounds that had never been touched by a living hand. They spoke in low voices. They said the man had been a bad one. They said the land remembered such things. Molly drifted in and out as they lifted her, carried her away. She felt the air move across her skin. She felt warmth for the first time in months. As she slept, her breathing softened, slow and steady, safe at last from footsteps in the yard and the scrape of a door opening behind her. They say yew trees keep old vows. They say stone keeps secrets. They say a convent keeps both. St. Bridget's cloister of Ash Grove sat back from the road like it had never learned the habit of greeting strangers. Its walls were pale and weathered, the kind of pale that came from years of rain and incense and quiet work. The ash grove beyond the orchard was older than the building, and the sisters treated it the way you treat something that might be listening. Sister Evelyn Farrell arrived in spring with a small case, a plain cross, and the kind of smile people wear when they've already decided they won't turn back. Sister Cleona Walsh was sworn in 3 months prior, she said. A rosary always clicked softly in her pocket when she walked, and her eyes were always amused by something. When they met, they fell into step without trying. In the mornings, Cleona would be at Evelyn's shoulder in the washroom, sleeves rolled high, talking low and fast about nothing much at all. In the afternoons, she would show Evelyn where the sun hit the stones warmest along the cloister walk. In the evenings, she would sit with her at supper and nudge her ankle under the table when the old sisters started in on a long story that had already been told twice. They weren't children, either of them. Both in their 20s, they both left lives behind, and even so, the first weeks had the feel of something new being built. One evening, when the bell had finished and the corridors had settled, Evelyn leaned in and asked with sincerity, but not without a slight sense of shame. "Do you ever wonder what doubt feels like in a place like this?" Cleona replied, "Nah, it's too nice to doubt here. I could stay here forever." On the first proper warm night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear, it wasn't excitement either. It was simply that her mind kept walking in circles, the way it always did when the day finally went quiet. She lay on her narrow bed, Cleona asleep in the next cot, and listened to the convent breathe, a distant creak, a soft footfall somewhere far off, the hush of the ash leaves outside. She got up to take a drink of water, and then she found herself at the window, looking down into the gardens. The garden paths were almost white under the moonlight. The hedges sat in dark blocks, and in the centre, near the small statue of Bridget, something was moving. At first, Evelyn thought it was one of the sisters on night duty, and then the figure stepped into a patch of light, and Evelyn felt her chest go tight, not in panic, in that quick, stunned way you get when your eyes insist on a thing before your mind agrees. The nun was old in the bones. She walked with the slow certainty of someone who had been walking those paths longer than the paths had been there. Her habit looked blacker than black, as if it drank the moonlight. Her veil sat just so, and her hands were clasped in front of her like she was holding something invisible. Evelyn watched, half hidden behind the curtain, and felt a strange thought push up through her. She looks like she's meant to be outside, not like a trespasser, more like a fixture. A breeze moved through the ash grove, and the nun's veil lifted an inch, then settled again. The woman paused, as if she had heard something Evelyn hadn't, and turned her head slightly toward the dormitory windows. Evelyn stepped back on instinct. Then, because she was young and foolish and curious, she did the opposite of what her instinct wanted. She pulled on her shoes, slipped a shawl over her shoulders, and went down the corridor. The chapel door was closed. The main hall was dark. Only the little lamp by the statue niche burned, a steady amber. Evelyn eased the side door open and stepped out into the night. The air had that clean spring bite to it, not cold enough to hurt, cold enough to feel honest. The garden smelled of damp soil and clipped hedge. And somewhere out beyond the wall, an owl called once and stilled. The old nun was still there, at the bend in the path near the ash grove. Evelyn approached slowly, aware of how loud her own footsteps seemed. The nun didn't startle. She didn't act as if a young sister appearing in the garden at night was strange. She simply waited. Evelyn stopped a few feet away. "Sister," she said, and realized she didn't know which sister. The old nun lifted her eyes, and in the moonlight her face looked almost too pale, the lines at the corners of her mouth deep, the eyes dark and steady. "Evening, child," the nun said. The voice wasn't soft, it wasn't harsh, it carried the calm weight of someone who had already seen the same problem 100 times. Evelyn said shyly, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I couldn't sleep." "No apologies needed," the nun said. "Sleep isn't a command, it's a mercy." Evelyn's shoulders eased slightly. Are you on duty, sister?" The old nun's mouth lifted in something close to a smile. "I'm on duty most of the time, whether anyone asks me or not." Evelyn let out a breath. I'm Sister Evelyn Farrell." The old nun studied her as if the name was familiar in a way Evelyn couldn't explain. "Benedicta," she said. "Sister Benedicta Crowley." Evelyn had heard the name in passing, but she couldn't place the face. She felt silly for not recognizing her. "I didn't know you walked the gardens at night," Evelyn said. "I walk when the place is honest," Benedicta replied. In daylight, everyone is performing. At night, the stone stops pretending. Evelyn didn't understand what that meant, but it landed in her chest anyway. They stood for a moment, two figures in a silent garden, and Evelyn felt the quiet around them deepen. It wasn't threatening, it was just thick, like a blanket pulled up around the shoulders. Benedicta looked toward the ash grove. "You're thinking," she said. Evelyn laughed once, embarrassed. "I always am." "And what are you thinking?" Evelyn hesitated, then she surprised herself by answering. "I'm thinking about doubt," she said. Benedicta turned her face back to Evelyn, as if that was the one thing worth hearing. "Doubt?" Benedicta repeated. Evelyn nodded. "I thought coming here would fix that. Not that I'm full of doubt, I don't know, I thought I'd feel certain." Benedicta's gaze held steady. "Certainty is rare," she said. "Most people are built out of questions. They just learn to hide them." Evelyn glanced down at her hands. "Is it a failure to question?" "It can be a failure to pretend you don't," Benedicta said. Evelyn looked up again. Benedicta continued. "Devotion isn't the absence of doubt. Devotion is what you do with it. Do you run from it? Do you drown it? Do you turn it into anger? Or do you sit with it quietly until it tells you what it's really afraid of?" Evelyn stared at her. "You make it sound like doubt is useful." "Oh, everything is useful," Benedicta said. "Even the parts of you that embarrass you." That night, Evelyn walked back inside with a strange sense that she'd been spoken to in a way that she hadn't been spoken to in years. She lay down and slept well, as if her mind had finally put down a bag it didn't realize it was carrying. The next day passed in ordinary duties: washroom, chapel, kitchen, gardening, the simple loop of the place. Evelyn didn't mention Benedicta to Cleona. She didn't know why. It felt like something private, like a small stone in her pocket she wanted to keep warm. The second night, she slept at first, and then she woke again, as if something had nudged her from inside. Cleona was fast asleep in the next cot. Evelyn looked out the window. Benedicta was there again, on the same path, at the same bend, walking as if she was keeping time for the whole place. Evelyn waited a full minute, arguing with herself, and then dressed and went out again. Benedicta turned as Evelyn approached, as if she'd been expecting her. "You're back," Benedicta said. I wanted to ask you something," Evelyn replied. Benedicta's eyes flicked over her face. "You want to ask 10 things." Evelyn let out a reluctant laugh. "Maybe." They walked slowly, side by side, along the path, the ash grove breathing softly at their left. Evelyn said, "Sometimes I feel foolish." "For what?" "For being here," Evelyn admitted. "For choosing a life where nothing happens, for choosing quiet. Sometimes I worry I've chosen quiet because I couldn't manage the noise." Benedicta nodded once. "Some people choose quiet because they're afraid. Some choose quiet because they're tired. Some choose quiet because they want to hear the part of themselves that gets drowned out." Evelyn frowned. "Which one am I?" Benedicta's mouth tightened slightly, not unkindly. "That's your work," she said. "No one else can answer it for you." They walked past the statue. Moonlight made the stone look almost alive. They did a full loop of the garden, and when Evelyn finally went back inside, she felt steadier than she had in weeks. The next day, in the washroom, Cleona was humming under her breath while folding sheets. Evelyn watched her for a while, feeling the words in her mouth, waiting for the moment that wouldn't make it sound like she was confessing to something ridiculous. And then she said, lightly, as if it didn't matter, "I've been talking to Sister Benedicta at night." Cleona's hands stopped. She didn't look up straight away. Evelyn kept folding, pretending she hadn't noticed the pause. Then Cleona turned slowly and fixed Evelyn with a blank stare. "You've been talking to Sister Benedicta?" Cleona asked. Evelyn nodded. "Out in the gardens?" Cleona's face stayed straight. Evelyn felt a faint prickle crawl up her neck, and Cleona said, "Evelyn, Sister Benedicta has been dead for 30 years. Evelyn's breath stopped. Her hands went still around the sheet. Cleona held the stare. Evelyn's mouth opened and nothing came out. And then Cleona let out a sudden snort of laughter, sharp, almost childish in the echoing washroom. She bent slightly, one hand on the table, laughing at Evelyn's expression. "Oh, you look like you've seen the devil at Mass." Evelyn stared at her, half curious, half relieved. "Cleona?" Cleona wiped her eye with the back of her wrist, grin wide now. "I'm only messing with Jet," Cleona said. "She's alive. She's been here years. She just looks like she climbed out of a stone coffin half the time." Evelyn's nerves loosened, the panic draining away in a shaky rush. Cleona's grin softened into something fond. "She's a bit odd," she said, "but she's a lovely woman when you get to know her, sharp as anything. She'll have you thinking properly if you listen." Evelyn said, "She's been talking to me about doubt." Cleona nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Aye," she said, "that'd be her." That night, Evelyn went out again. Benedicta was waiting near the ash grove. Moonlight caught the edge of her veil. Her face looked cut from pale stone. Evelyn walked up, trying to smile. "You look troubled," Benedicta said. Evelyn hesitated, then huffed a small laugh. "Oh, it's nothing. Cleona made a little joke earlier on, and it kind of stuck with me a bit. It's no big deal." Benedicta's eyes narrowed slightly, as if humour was a language she understood, but didn't speak often. "Did she?" Evelyn nodded. "I told her I'd be talking to you. She looked at me with a straight face and told me you'd been dead for 30 years. Benedicta stopped walking. Evelyn's smile faltered. She was joking. She snorted, laughing. She said you're alive and you've been here for years and that you're a lovely lady." Benedicta's gaze stayed on Evelyn's face, steady and unreadable. Evelyn's stomach dipped. "I've upset you. I apologize." Benedicta's voice came low. "What did she call you?" Evelyn blinked. "What?" "Did she call you Evelyn?" Benedicta asked. "Or did she call you by something else?" Evelyn was trying to remember. She called me Evelyn." Benedicta nodded once, slowly. "And you called her Cleona?" "Of course," Evelyn said, baffled. Benedicta's eyes softened by a fraction. "And that felt normal to you?" Evelyn was finding it hard to swallow. "What are you saying?" Benedicta started walking again, but more slowly, as if she wanted Evelyn to keep up without falling. "Child," Benedicta said, "tell me something true, something simple." Evelyn's mouth felt stiff, unsure of what she meant. I'm here?" Benedicta's eyes stayed forward. "Say it again." Evelyn tried. "I'm here." Benedicta nodded. "Where do you sleep?" Evelyn, still confused, said, "In the dormitory." "In which bed?" Benedicta asked. Evelyn stared. "The bed by the window." "And Cleona?" Benedicta asked. "Beside me." Benedicta's tone stayed calm, gentle. "How long has she been beside you?" Evelyn's mind flashed through mornings and meals and laughter and whispered jokes. "Since I arrived. Evelyn said. "Since the beginning." Benedicta stopped near the ash grove. The ash leaves above them barely moved. "Evelyn," Benedicta said, "how long have you been in this place?" Evelyn's brow creased. "A few months." Benedicta's gaze turned to her, full and direct. "And you have never once noticed what the other sisters do not say?" Evelyn's heart started to beat in her ears. "What they do not say?" Benedicta's voice lowered. "They never address Cleona, do they?" Evelyn's mouth stayed open. The memory came, sharp and sudden. Meals where Cleona spoke only to Evelyn, duties where Cleona stood near but never seemed to be assigned, conversations where older sisters looked past her without comment. Evelyn tried to laugh. It wouldn't come. Benedicta's eyes held her. "You've been speaking with the living," she said. "And you think the living are ignoring your friend out of rudeness?" Evelyn's hands went cold. Benedicta's voice softened further. "There's a mercy in the mind," she said. "It gives you what you can bear when you can't bear the rest." Evelyn's lips trembled. "Cleona's real." Benedicta nodded. "She's real to you." Evelyn stared at the ash grove as if it might answer. Then she said, very quietly, "Sister, what's really going on?" Benedicta's face moved into something that looked like grief, and then she said, "Cleona Walsh was struck on the road 15 years ago, the week after she was sworn in." The garden fell silent around Evelyn, as if the world had leaned in to listen. Evelyn's knees felt weak. She grabbed the edge of the stone bench near the path. "No," she whispered. "No, I've been with her every day." Benedicta crouched slightly, bringing her face closer to Evelyn's, voice steady. "Evelyn," Benedicta said, "you've been with her as much as your heart has needed, and that's not nothing." Evelyn's breath came fast. Why would she be here?" Benedicta's eyes softened again. "Because you speak about doubt," she said, "and she understands it in a way you can't yet. She didn't leave this place by choice." Evelyn's face crumpled. Benedicta didn't reach out to touch her. Her presence was firm enough. Evelyn's tears fell silently. She wiped them with her sleeve, ashamed of the sound her breath was making. Benedicta waited, patient as stone. When Evelyn could speak again, she said, "What am I meant to do?" Benedicta's gaze flicked toward the dormitory window. "Go back inside," she said. "Look carefully. Let the place show you what it has been showing you all along." Evelyn stood, unsteady, and walked back toward the convent with legs that felt like they belonged to somebody else. The corridor was empty. The lamps burned low. Her footsteps sounded loud. She reached the dormitory door and pushed it open. It smelled of clean linen and soap, rows of narrow beds, neat and simple. Evelyn walked to her place by the window. Her bed was there, sheets tucked tight, blankets folded. She turned to look at the bed beside hers. There was a frame, yes, but there was no mattress, no pillow, no folded blanket, just bare slats, as if the bed had been empty for a very long time. Evelyn stared, and for a moment her mind tried to fight it, tried to build the mattress back into existence. It couldn't. She backed away slowly, hand over her mouth. She left the dormitory and walked down the hall, not running, not able to run, moving as if any quick movement would shatter her. At the end of the corridor, there was a cabinet recessed into the wall, small keepsakes behind glass, old photographs, little plaques, relics that remembered the sisters, what had been lost and what had been carried. Evelyn walked straight past it, lost to her thoughts. And inside that cabinet, among the small items, was a simple wooden cross with a brass plate. And the plate read, Sister Cleona Walsh, taken in service to God and His Church, faithful in prayer, steadfast in devotion. May she rest in the mercy of Christ. When you wake in the morning, please like, subscribe, and leave a little comment. Maybe tell me where you're listening from, because those quiet, small interactions are what keep this channel alive. The gentle echoes that let these stories return. Come back every night. Let this be your resting place. Good night.